Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Bulichi. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Erik Bulichi. And Erik is a senior manager of corporate sales at Lever. So those of you who have listened to the podcast recently know that we also had Kelly Del Curto from Lever not too long ago here on the Startup Selling Show. And in that conversation I had with Kelly, we focused around hiring practices and systems that you could be using as a startup founder in a growing company to build and grow and scale your team. Well, in today's episode with Erik, instead of talking about hiring and filling out your team, we talked about selling and how Erik and his team go about their sales process, selling their product in the corporate sales division of Lever. And so just to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the topics that we talked about to whet your appetite and so that you know what to listen for. First of all, Erik and I jumped in and talked about something which I think is critically important that oftentimes is forgotten whenever we're out there selling, and that is the buyer journey. The buyer journey. So, some of us might be of sound mind and have gone and done buyer personas to understand what our buyers might be thinking and what problems they have and what challenges they might have and how they might make decisions in the marketplace. But oftentimes many times when I talk to startups, what we haven't done is think about the buyer's journey. How do we truly create empathy around their situation, their position, their business, and their challenges every single day? And so that buyer journey is not just a single point in time of who we are selling to and what their challenges are, but what is the process by which they are discovering the problems? What is the process by which they're discovering the solutions to their problems as they sit in their seat at their company each and every day? The second thing that we dove into, and we spent a lot of time in this particular topic, is the dissection and the definition between a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead. So oftentimes those are called MQLs and SQLs. And we talked through how Erik and his team have created a lead scoring system and have also built out specific sales cadences and sequences that they send out to a marketing qualified lead and to their sales qualifying leads. And understanding the difference between what constitutes an actual sales qualified lead, just meaning that just because somebody has opened up a couple of emails or just because somebody has downloaded a white paper from you doesn't necessarily mean that they are ready to buy. And so we dove deep into that part of their business and how they run sales at Lever. There's an acronym that I wrote down, which is APV, always provide value. And that's at the core of the system that Erik and his team have created and are implementing every day at Lever. So you definitely want to listen for that. We also talked about the difference between handling inbound leads and how to handle outbound leads. So inbound leads, sometimes we think that they're ready to buy just because they're an inbound lead, when in fact, maybe they're not ready to buy. And there's some qualification that we need to do as part of that process for handling those inbound leads. Additionally, with outbound leads, sometimes those of us that are doing some of the outbound work, we might feel hesitant about putting somebody through a more rigorous lead qualification process because, hey, we're the ones doing the outbound, so why should we be the ones asking all the questions? Well, Erik and his team have a system for that as well. So not only do we talk about the MQLs and SQLs, but then we talked about how to handle inbound versus outbound leads. These are some of the key topics that I think are really, really important for you to be listening to. And I think that you're going to learn a lot in terms of how Erik and his team think about their process, and more importantly, how do they build relationships and trust with their prospective customers so that when the decision time comes to actually engage in a sales conversation and to engage in an actual sales process, that prospective customer is ready to go, ready to buy, and ready to share the important information that's necessary for Erik and his team to decide whether or not Lever is the right fit and for the prospective buyer to know whether or not Lever is the right solution for that. I think you're going to get lots and lots of really important frameworks and tactical tips that you can take, mold, adopt, and apply to your startup each and every day. So that's the introduction. That's my conversation that you've got ahead of you with Erik Bulichi, the Senior Manager of Corporate Sales over at Lever. So without any further ado, let's head over to my conversation with Erik.
Erik Bulichi.
Yes.
Oh, I've been practicing all morning to make sure I got that right.
You nailed it.
I nailed it, man.
You did.
Perfect practice makes perfect.
It certainly does. How's your morning going out there?
Dude, morning is going great. it's just turning into a habit. Seems I speak to you right after I get back from a run or something. So just got back from a workout before the rest of the afternoon. So
Well,
I'm
good.
feeling good. I've got the endorphins flowing. Looking forward to the conversation. I'm really glad that you're able to join us here on the show.
Yeah, I'm very excited as well. I'm looking forward to jumping in. And hey, if chatting with me is helping you work out, we can chat, daily, weekly if you need to.
You're like my personal fitness coach now. You don't even know it. You're like, oh man, I haven't worked out in a while. Let me schedule a call with Erik, and then that will be my forcing function to get my butt in shape. So, well, listen, Erik, like I've already mentioned, to the folks listening a little bit about your background. And I've got your name right, Erik Bulichi. So you're the senior manager of corporate sales at Lever. I'd love to hear from you specifically when people say, what do you do? Or who are you? Who's the man behind the man behind the man?
Or
What do you do? Tell us a little bit about Lever and tell us about the work that you're taking on every day.
Yeah, Scott, and I appreciate you having me. That the title just sounds so official when I hear it like that. As mentioned, I'm a sales manager here, a senior sales manager of the corporate segment here at Lever. Lever is a modern day applicant tracking system. We within the sales organization, we have 5 different segments. Corporate's kind of nestled right in the middle there, so not quite enterprise or strat, but a little bit of a slower velocity than say a small business team here. I have a wonderful team of 7 eager, hungry account executives, and my days consist of working alongside them, doing all things coaching, jumping on calls, deal strategizing, and having some fun in between.
That's awesome. So one thing that, I want to get into a couple of the topics that you and I talked about yesterday. Before we do that, I think there's kind of maybe a lesson or some learning right there in what you described, because you said corporate kind of sits between enterprise and strat, meaning I'm assuming like strategic accounts, when you say strat, and then it sits above, it's like slightly slower velocity than small business. This is something a lot of startups themselves they're trying to figure out how to segment the market. Should I focus on SMBs, or should I what's enterprise versus SMB, or what is enterprise versus small, like business to business selling? And I'm just wondering if there's any specific definitions that have evolved there at Lever. Because I think sometimes there's this habit, I think all of us are like, oh, that company's got it all figured out, so I'll just do what they do and mimic what they do. And it may not necessarily be the right thing. And so I'm just curious if there's been some evolution as to how Lever's approach these different strata of accounts and how it might be continuing to evolve.
Yeah, it's a timely question. We actually underwent a pretty major shift within the last 12 months through that lens. So, I think commonly people will look at things like ACV, and they'll use that to dictate enterprise, strategic, SMB, and to some extent we'll use that as a directional bearing. But what we found out about, I think it was around last May, is that for our segment, or for our industry, which is human resources, there's the level of strategic selling that needs to go on in organizations that maybe are 85 people large. These startups that are, maybe they're seed round or they're A round funded. These sales cycles are taking 90 days. A lot has to get poured into these. So what we've actually done is we've actually taken a little bit more of a granular approach. So we have a small business segment that really just works with, think about like incubator type companies, right? 1 to 20. And then from there we have 20 to 100. And the sale there is vastly different. Usually you're dealing with someone who's maybe you're a co-founder, you're dealing with someone at a C level in those smaller companies, and every hire is of course crucial, but so is every dollar. So what we've done is we've broken them out into more segments so we can understand the difference of playing chess, right, versus playing checkers. And we've seen our win rates have increased by doing that, because when it comes to coaching, now we could understand that buyer journey at a much more granular level, which really allows us to be prepared and to coach to kind of that common journey.
Okay, so I was just scratching down some notes on my iPad as you were talking. Eric. So these two segments called like companies with 1 to 20 employees and then companies with 20 to 100. The difference really is who you're selling to, because 1 to 20, it's the CEO that's really managing the whole hiring process. But once you get to roughly 20, you're probably going to hire some kind of HR person. It may not be like a head of people or a chief human resource officer, but you got somebody who's kind of helping you manage that flow because you're hiring a bunch of engineers and product people and salespeople. And it's just not something a CEO alone can handle. So you mentioned this idea of buyer journey. So the journey of the buyer changes based on who you're selling to. Is that a correct way to summarize what you just said?
That's a wonderful sum up. Absolutely right. And with that change adds, additional layers of complexity, and it's almost backwards where, some of our small business reps are more comfortable speaking with the founder than they would be maybe say a head of talent, which is unique in itself.
Why is that? Why do you think like they're more comfortable doing that?
Yeah, Scott, I think it's because they're used to just getting more reps, right? When we get an inbound demo request in that segment, typically it's going to be a co-founder. It's going to be someone at C-level, where that's your typical phone call. When they move up in the ranks and they move into, say, like the corporate segments, and I know it probably sounds weird hearing this, and me saying it feels almost silly, but there's a level of increased uncertainty when you're chatting with someone that's maybe the director of people, because then you have to really understand that you're below that line, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just speaking to that director of people, understanding, in our case, the recruiting process and how they go about finding top talent. It's understanding, well, from there, how do I get to Scott and how do I have that higher level conversation, or how do I get to Kelly and talk about that budget and things like timeline? So it adds another layer of complexity that, we just have to be prepared for.
It's timely because this morning we had a coaching call with one of our clients, and the exact sort of problem came up where they have like the business team who wants to buy and use his software platform, but to actually get any real progress in the sales process, he has to get access to more of a technical buyer who's actually in charge of platforms and integrations and all this other stuff. And that was one of the things we exactly were talking about. Like, how do you get access to the other people that are ultimately driving the maybe not necessarily give you a yes, but they can certainly give you a no.
Yeah.
If you're not careful about how you position it. So do you guys have any strategies in particular that you teach to your reps to help with this process of getting access to the decision maker? Because I know I always hate when somebody's like, oh, this sounds great. Send me your deck and then I'll share it with the team and then we'll let you know. And you're like, oh boy, this is going nowhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I don't have all the right answers. I wish I did. We approach this with best practices in mind. And those include, first and foremost, acknowledging your stakeholder. If they are below the line, getting a sense for what their day looks like, right? What type of struggles do they have? Understanding your product market fit, overlaying that with that individual and asking yourself, how can we have what type of positive business outcomes can we generate by teaming up? Ultimately, you're going to ask questions that are going to be more founded in business pain. That point of contact probably won't have the exposure to answer adequately. And once you start asking questions that maybe are resulting into, hey, I don't know, well, then the next obvious question is who does, right? Yeah. And then from there, assuming hopefully that you've built up some equity with that individual, teaming up with them, right? Really creating. Oftentimes we confuse coach with champions. Really trying to understand, are they a champion, meaning that they're going to help sell on my behalf and I'm not there and they have that influence? Or are they more of a coach where they'll divulge information from me, but maybe they're a little bit standoffish of taking that long walk down that hallway and asking for things like budget or time?
Yeah. Well, I think I love how you position this. Like you talked about like basically being empathetic and prioritizing business outcomes and teaming up. It's just really a mindset, like the selling mindset of, instead of saying, okay, well, how do I get access to the CEO? Instead say, well, let's just focus on the now, the person in front of me. Let's be present with this conversation. Let's really listen to what this person needs, whether it's, they came in or inbound, they probably came in for a reason, or even if it's outbound and, they took the call or they took a meeting with me, probably for a reason. So let's just focus on this person. And like you said, let's make sure there's a mutual business outcome. And then if we do that, then it is easy to partner. And then it is easy. It's much easier to get that audience instead of feeling like you're just using that person as a, no pun intended, as a lever to get to the next real decision maker, right?
It's funny. That lever pun is something I try to stay. I use that probably daily. It's hard not to.
Yeah.
I think you put it really,
yeah.
It's really making sure that, we use things like, MedPick and, we have all these methodologies in our mind. Oftentimes, in my opinion, too often, we lose sight of that customer journey, right? We're here to delight the customer and the prospect and ask questions and really genuinely be curious. Of course, methodology is great for more of a diagnostic tool, but really oftentimes I think that we could spend a little bit more time on who we're talking to and being active and being, listening versus worrying about how do I leapfrog and get to that next step.
Yeah. And like this idea of buyer journey, again, it just forces you to be empathetic, putting yourself in their shoes. What is their journey? How are they thinking? What are their responses? What are they responding to internally? What are they reacting to internally? What's driving the conversation in the first place? Just for definition purposes, you just mentioned MedPick for folks that may not be familiar with that particular acronym.
Yeah, so there's MedPick, or some folks who maybe are more familiar with Medic. It's essentially, I mentioned that we use this as a diagnostic tool, but MedPick is used to really help identify blind spots. It's an acronym. It has things like metrics, identify pain, champion, competition, paper process, buyer process, and economic buyer. So it affords us an opportunity, and I emphasize post-call because we've had some challenges when we implemented MedPick early on that, we might be on a qualification phone call and we're almost going through MedPick like a checklist, which is obviously not, you kind of lose sight of the buyer journey, right? So I stress to anybody who's listening, when you think about something, any methodology, let alone MedPick, really understanding that if you have maybe the identify pain and you're building a champion, that's okay. That's a step in the right direction. Where you turn that corner and it starts to have an adverse effect is when you're almost interrogating someone by asking them these questions. So it's always important to note that as well.
Yeah, it's I've seen that in action, and whether using like Medic or MedPick, or there's a framework BANT, budget, authority, need, timing. Even the way that an acronym BANT is set up, it's like budget, authority, need, timing. Like the most important two things are need and timing, but yet we start with budget and authority. So if you were to just follow that strictly, like, okay, really great to talk to you. So do you have budget for this decision? Like if that was like the first question, obviously it would be absurd to ask that.
Yeah.
But it's not far off from reality when you start thinking about whatever framework and you're like, well, I got to qualify this lead. I got to check all these boxes. So, before I let you go, who's the real decision maker here? You can really tie yourself up and blow a lot of the capital that you could have created, social capital or trust earlier in the call if you get too strict around like, oh, I got to check this box in the last 3 minutes of the call. So I appreciate you sharing that, going down that path a little bit in terms of how you think about sales and the buyer journey, because I think it's an important backdrop, and I think these frameworks are always important for people to kind of hear how other companies and people like you are managing that. It actually led us really nicely into one of the main topics that I really wanted to talk with you about was this idea of, in the sales funnel, you and I talked about the difference between marketing qualified leads and sales qualified leads. So we call them MQLs and SQLs. And then, the Q, meaning qualification or qualifying, it's really a struggle for a lot of companies out there, especially when they're first kicking off their whole sales process. Like you get the early customers, a lot of times are intros and advisors or people that early adopters and innovators that happen to find you. And you're like, wow, that was easy. Like they bought that really fast.
Yeah.
But once you get into like the real selling, you're trying to ramp up your first $1 million or $2 million in revenue, or you're trying to scale to the first 10, you got to have some real process in place to develop leads and really differentiate between, okay, yeah, they're reading our stuff. They're coming to the blog, they sign up for the newsletter, but are they really so they might be marketing qualified, but are they really a sales lead? And so I really wanted to take a few minutes and kind of dive into this a little bit. And maybe we can start with some definitions. Like how do you think about, or how do you define the difference between a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead?
Yeah. Great. I appreciate the intro there. It's a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I feel like I will forever be a student and never be a master of this. It's the target's always moving.
You and me both, brother.
Yeah.
I've been doing sales for almost 25 years, man, and every day I'm like, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I think when I look at so marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead, I think at a high level, the only difference really is the readiness to buy. Yeah, right? If you were to try to kind of distill everything, the only difference is how prepared are they? Have they started a journey? Are they just looking? So when I talk about a sales qualified lead, at least I can speak for how we operate. We've actually, you mentioned BANT there earlier, which struck a chord with me. Mm-hmm. We've actually moved away from BANT. So a lot of companies will traditionally say, hey, 2 out of 4. All right, maybe you have the budget, maybe you're at the power line. Okay, that's an SQL. We've actually moved away from that, and what we've moved into from a behavior standpoint, I'm actually now, the definition of an SQL is, as a rep or as an SDR, I am able to articulate pain and the consequence of that pain. Mm. And some folks might think that's oversimplified. And in fairness, there's a conversation to be had there. But really, for us, when we think about things, methodologies like MedPick, people buy because there's a pain, right? They don't buy just because they want to spend money. So for us, really moving away from the old kind of archaic BANT and going into identifying pain is a big step in the right direction for us personally. One of the struggles that we have, and that we're always trying to redefine, when is it the right time to have either account executive or a BDR or an SDR reach out to a lead that marketing says, hey, maybe they've downloaded some content, maybe it's thought leadership, now it's worth an opportunity cost to spend some time in that direction. When I came on board a year ago, we have lead scoring like most companies do, but the lead scoring wasn't diverse enough. Right? So if someone downloaded one of the ebooks that we produced and visited the website, that would trigger a flag for someone to reach out. Okay. What we realized with that, Scott, is that our conversions were, we were probably sub 1%. So we had a whole lot of volume, and everybody loves volume. They're MQLs, but all MQLs, as we know, are not created equally. Right? So what we've done is we took a gigantic step back, and we went on a listening tour, as we called it. We understood, well, why were some campaigns converting higher than others? And what we found, and not surprising probably to anybody listening, is that product-related, whether it's a demo day webinar, an on-demand webinar, maybe it's an ebook about diversity and inclusion, but relating back to how that relates to effective teams and successful hires, those converted much higher than just a typical thought leadership piece. So with that is we created scoring around that, where if you sign up for a demo day, we'd attribute 15 points versus maybe a simple handbook would be worth 2. And I won't bore you with all the different pieces that we have in there, but the impact that's had for us is that we're sending far fewer MQLs to actually human beings, but the conversion rates that we have set, we've seen a huge increase, right? A material impact's been made, and it's allowing us the time that we really need to personalize this outreach. All right, and then lastly, the last piece of the puzzle is for the team. We've teamed up with marketing, but primarily driven by sales. Is we've created kind of 4 core cadences that are templates that we use for, maybe it's a webinar, and then we have one for our blog, right, and then we have one for diversity and inclusion that allows someone to not have to spend a ton of time. The framework is there, but they can plug in pieces of personalization, and then we send them on their way with either usually a 7 or a 9-point touch cadence through one of our automated tools.
Got it. Okay. So that's really insightful, like this idea of, so once a lead hits the certain score, then does the sales rep themselves, like the SDR, the BDR, decide which of those 4 cadences to send the lead through?
That's correct. So in Salesforce, we'll use campaign activity tracking. and we'll give visibility into all the interactions they've had with the content. Typically, we suggest using the most recent. Normally, that most recent piece of content is the one that pushed them over that threshold from a scoring perspective. And we can say, hey, Scott, I noticed that you downloaded the ebook on, diversity and inclusion. Hey, here's another piece of content that's in that similar vein. I'd love to talk with you about it. So not even about lever, right? So we continue to nurture. If we get a response from that, we really want to make sure that we have the ability to resist the urge of wanting to sell lever. And when you think about a qualification phone call, if you're fortunate enough to get to that point of them wanting to commit a half an hour or an hour to you, really understanding that an outbound qualification phone call is going to be handled differently than an inbound hand raiser. And we take things from there.
All right, I'm off and running in my conversation with Erik Bulichi. Listen, I've got something that I'm really, really, really excited to share with you. And that is my new book. I've written a book. This is my third published book, and I'm super, super stoked for it because this is a process that it took me over 3 years to complete. And the name of the book is called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. Ramp up your B2B startups repeatable revenue with the Q framework. And so if you just focus on the main part of that title, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, I think that should tell you every single thing that you need to know about this book, particularly if you are a startup. Listen, we both know that hustle doesn't scale. And as a company founder, you started with your idea, how to solve a problem, how to build a product, and most importantly, how to impact your customers and change your industry. So yes, of course you have to hustle. There's lots of grit, there's lots of hard work, there's lots of sweat that has to go into getting that startup out of the garage and off the ground. But in order to get to the place where you can make the impact that you want to make in your marketplace, you have to start ramping up and scaling up your sales operations. And this book is designed to help you do just that using what I call the Q framework. And so I would love it if you could pick up a copy if you're a startup founder, whether you're at the earliest stages of growth and you're just now starting to sell your product, or you're in that middle stage where you're ramping up to that first $1 million in revenue, or you're now past that $1 million in revenue, you've closed that Series A round of capital, and now you're trying to figure out how to scale your team. Wherever you are in that startup journey, I think you're gonna get a ton of value out of getting a copy of this book. So if you head over to Amazon, it's probably the best place to go. And you can either search my last name, Sambucci, S-A-M-B-U-B-U-C-C-I, or just type in Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. You'll see it. The cover is mostly white with some purple print. Pretty easy to locate. You should see it next to a couple of other books that I've written. So again, that name of that book, the title of the book is Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. For now, it's available on Amazon for just 99 cents. The Kindle version, and we're putting a hard copy together that's going to be available in the next couple of weeks, maybe by the time you listen to this podcast. So that's it for now. Go over to Amazon.com, check out a copy of Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, and let me know how I did with the book. I think you're going to love it. Leave me a review if you would. We've had 18 reviews on the book already. 17 of those have been 5-star. One of them has been 4-star. And in reading the 4-star review, I'm kind of scratching my head why I didn't give you a 5-star review, because it's a really good review. So I'm super stoked that the book's being well received. I'm so glad that it's out there and getting in the hands of people just like you, because that's why I wrote it. I want to help you stop hustling and start scaling with your startup. Okay. Well, thanks for listening. That's the end of the commercial. Let's head back to my conversation with Erik Bulichi.
So if I understand right, so somebody who tips the scale and goes from MQL to SQL because and this is just at a very high level, because they've downloaded enough content that's product related, you don't necessarily then say, thanks for downloading the ebook, do you want to see a demo? You're actually much softer. Like, it's very ninja in a lot of ways, because you're almost, it's like you're just putting the path in front of them and then inviting them, hey, if you want to come down this path, here it is. Here's a door. If you want to walk through it, it's totally up to you, as opposed to trying to like jam somebody into a call that they might just need another touch or two before they get there. Or maybe before they do a demo, like, it would be great to spend some time with your expert on diversity and inclusion in a webinar, or read a couple more blog posts. And it's almost like an insurance policy of some kind, because if they're that interested, they're not going to like go away because you slow rolled it a little bit. And if they aren't quite ready, this will help warm them up.
Yeah, we have a mantra here, Scott. We call it APV, and it's always provide value.
Love that.
Yeah, and we live by it, and it's it's worked really well from a standpoint of, again, I know we've talked a lot about this buyer journey. Everybody has a need, everybody has a pain, but ultimately, it's not up to us to tell them what that is. We can help them discover or uncover by challenging and helping them get to that point. But ultimately, something like diversity and inclusion, that doesn't scream, hey, I want to buy an applicant tracking system. That says, hey, I'm thinking a lot about this. I mean, if we could team up with them and be that thought leader, and ultimately have maybe an intro level conversation about why they're thinking like this, I know that Lever is going to help them find and really make sure that we can manage things like diversity and inclusion. But ultimately, it's going to be a team effort to try to bridge that gap, ultimately coming to that place of, maybe it does make sense for us to talk for 15 or 30 minutes and maybe take a little bit of a deeper dive into what that means for the business.
Yeah, this example of diversity and inclusion as a problem that the client has, I think it's a really great example, because somebody might look at that at a, however size organization. It could be 20, it could be 200, it could be 2,000. Say, look, I want to do better, or we need to do better. Like, we just did our own demographics and we realized, like, wow, we're not very good at this. We want to get better at this. The customer themselves or the prospect themselves, they're probably not going, okay, so let me go to Google and search applicant tracking system as a way to solve this problem.
Yeah.
They just know that this problem exists, and they've gone to the effort of then going and finding content and trying to learn more about how they can do better. And so there's a perfect example where you're selling the problem, not the product, because they might not themselves make the connection that your product solves the problem. But if you can help them understand their problem and give them some, like you said, value around, here are some ways to think about the problem. There's all other companies that we've worked with have solved for this or are solving for this. Then the customer will then say, oh, okay. So, like, by the way, what do you guys do in this area? You're like, oh, well, let me just show you. If you want to see, I can show you our ATS, and then, we can take the conversation from there. So I think that specific example, because the customer themselves, we see this a lot. We see the connection, but it doesn't mean they see the connection. When you're selling a new product in a new market, sometimes it's really hard for people to see that connection, even though we see it all the time. It's easy for us to see it because we're in it every day. They're not.
Yeah. That's a really good point you bring up there. I'll never forget one of my first bosses back in my time at DemandForce in 2010. He would always say, hey, if you tell somebody something, that's you selling. If they tell it to you, it's true, right? So really, really looking at that and asking myself, and when it comes to something like diversity and inclusion, we have the commercial insights, we have the data that ultimately will speak to that payoff, that bottom line, that impact on the business. And once those questions start flowing from them, it affords us that opportunity. But we really have to make sure that we're being honest, we're gut checking ourselves and asking ourselves, whose agenda are we on? And I think that's a great point there. And it's challenging, but ultimately what we do here in terms of really that nurture play seems to work quite well for us.
Yeah, and I think for anybody listening, we're obviously talking about the HR world and applicant tracking systems, but I think you can, think about, the types of problems, going back to the buyer journey, what are the problems that your buyers are dealing with, and then relating your conversations around those problems as opposed to your product. Even if like, man, you're like gritting your teeth, like, I can't wait to show them the product because they're going to love it. The longer that you wait, in a lot of ways, and the more you get, like you said, here's the pain that you're having, and here's the consequence of that pain. Now you've got somebody who's willing to engage in a conversation that says, well, I've got this pain. It's costing me this. There's these consequences. How can you help me fix that?
Yeah.
Oh, glad you asked. Happy to show you.
Great point.
And then it's not even selling, you're just showing.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott.
Cool. One quick thing I want to just go up a level. You mentioned about a demo day.
Yes.
Is that like an actual live event where you're inviting people to come and visit with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, the short answer is yes. It is a twice a month we host a demo day, and that is it's product focused to an extent. Typically, the demo day would consist of someone like myself and you chatting about your world, what your day looks like through the lens of talent or recruiting, and then we use the product just to provide some context in terms of how we implement strategy. If you tell me, hey, listen, Eric, every Friday I pull reports to tell me average time per hire and average time per stage. Well, then we lean on the product to kind of walk through what that looks like. And then we always have a pre-recorded demo that we allow folks to sign up on the website. And that's a really nice way to generate some marketing qualified leads who maybe aren't at the point yet where they want to talk to someone like me or someone on my team.
Yeah.
And again, that gives us the opportunity where if they sign up for it and if they attend, wonderful, we follow up. If not, that's okay too, right? We offer that personalized walkthrough. But it wasn't a mistake. They want to go to one of these self-running videos with intention of not speaking typically to someone on the sales side yet. So it's important for us to choose reality, understand that, and operate with that in mind.
Okay. And so the demo days, those are like in-person events, people like drive or whatever, or are they online?
They're online. Well, we do a little bit of both. So we have done the ones in person. Those are typically done in a San Francisco, a New York, a Boston, where we have some pretty dense user base. But then we always have the ones biweekly that you can sign up on the website, and it's a pretty nice source of consistent flow of inbound for us.
Yeah, that's cool. It makes the prospect feel like they're in more control. Like it's because we've seen this too. It's like, well, yeah. All right, I'll talk to a rep if that's what it takes to get a demo. It's just like, I really don't want to talk to the rep. I wish I could just, and you see this all the time, isn't there? Could you just give me a login or do you have a self-running demo? And that's because people, they want to avoid this idea of feeling pitched. So I think there's some nuance in terms of how you present that self-running demo in a way that you leave just enough gaps that like, hey, if you want to see, here's how it works. If you want to see how it works for you, then, we can customize, a demo just for you. And your company or something like that, so that they don't feel like they have all the information they need to make a decision. It should more, I think, open questions for them as opposed to answer questions.
Absolutely. I mean, we try to be there as a thought leader in the space to maybe challenge norms. I think again, specifically for me in my life, we're in the recruiting space, we're in the hiring space, and that landscape has changed drastically in the last decade. Top talent.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Top talent's not knocking on everybody's door. There's a lot of amazing opportunity out there for engineers, and there's not a lot of real first-class engineers. So that question is, well, how do we become proactive? And the demo is meant to really challenge that and help folks think about a couple of different strategies at a high level. But of course, there's much more nuance that goes into that we try to offer the opportunity to have more of a textured conversation on what that would look for each individual business and use case.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about qualifying, and you mentioned about like an outbound versus inbound lead, because this is another question I get all the time is, somebody's an inbound lead, for example, they might come to your website and you've got a form that says, request a demo, right? And they request a demo and you don't really know much about that lead. They might be sort of silent following posts and reading your blog, but they might not even be on your mailing list. So you can't really score them. Or they've heard about you because, one of their friends at a different company is using it, and like, oh, you got to definitely check out Lever or this or that company. So all of a sudden you get this like Bluebird inbound lead, request a demo, but you don't know much about them. So how do you kind of handle those situations? And then on the other end, you might have, your scoring, right? And then you start doing some outbound campaigning and you do get somebody on the phone. How much do you turn it into like a true qualification call versus more of a mutual conversation? These are, just a number of topics around this. So maybe we can start with, how do you handle those inbound leads? It's one, if you've kind of followed that process, they've lead scored and they've MQL, and then you put them through this cadence, and it's like a very natural flow into, okay, great, let's spend 20 minutes exploring. But how do you handle qualification? How do you think about qualification for inbound leads that come from outside of those channels or those sequences?
Yeah, it's a great thought. It all starts with the pre-call research. Internally with our team here, I think everybody probably can say they have some idea of what their ICP is, or if they don't, they probably have a general idea of what that customer profile does see success typically looks like. For us,
ICP, real quick, just for definition, meaning ideal customer profile.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, ICP, ideal customer profile. If you got to you had a magic wand and you got to pick the ideal customer that's going to see the most amount of success and kind of why this product exists in the first place, it would be for that customer or that prospect. Inbound's funny. What we've noticed here at Lever is about 30% of the inbound hand raisers that we get, and hand raiser defining that as someone saying, hey, I would like to see a demo, or how much do you cost? About 30% of those, you get both, are folks who we really wouldn't consider within our ideal customer profile. Maybe they're, for us, it's an agency. Maybe it's someone who's operating on the other side of the world where things don't necessarily align when it comes to support hours and things like that. It's still very important for us to reach out to them. So what we typically will do is we'll kind of have this pre-call checklist where we'll check things like LinkedIn, open jobs. Really, what's more important is when we're going into that phone call, really just talking less and asking more open-ended questions. What was the impetus for you logging on last night and saying, hey, you know what, I want to see a demo. Tell me why. And maybe the common response that we hear typically, Scott, is, well, we want to change how we're hiring, right? And sometimes you'll say, okay, great. Well, we can talk a little bit about that. Or in an ideal world, you say, great, tell me more. All right, what do you want to change? So really getting an idea of, current state's one thing, but on the inbound side, someone's requesting a demonstration, they probably have an ideal state in mind. And we'll talk a little bit about the outbound in a second. But the inbound, exclusively in that category, we're big proponents of asking, well, great, let me ask you. Now that I understand a little bit about the current state, talk to me about what you're looking to get to. Where do you want to be in 6 or 12 months? What does that look like? And they'll say, well, we want to have a process in place where we can track, we can add referrals. Ultimately, what we're looking to do is grow 2x in 12 months. Okay, great. Again, what type of impact is that going to have on the business if you're able to double in size? And you'll probably get a canned response like, well, we'll be growing. Okay, tell me a little bit more about that. So really for us, it's there's a tactful way to do this where it doesn't sound like you're just interrogating them. I think we know the research shows folks like talking about that ideal state a heck of a lot more than they might want to talk about the current state that's not working. So really getting a sense for understanding what the opportunity is, why they requested, if they didn't do anything, so if they stay with the incumbent solution, what's the cost of that? And for us, that's the key question. If I can answer that question adequately and say, well, if you don't make a switch and if you stay with what you're doing now, it's going to have X impact on the business. And of course, that impact is going to be negative. And if we can answer that question, and if we feel good with what that answer looks like, and then we'll move from maybe an initial qualification to a real qual, where we get even deeper in that segment. But again, I guess to summarize that or to synthesize that, the key for us is to asking ourselves that question of what is the pain, what is the impact, and what is that ideal state going to do for that business?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that you need to get back to the pain. And something you mentioned about, like as an example, they might say, we want to change our hiring process. And you followed up with, okay, well, tell me more about that. Because I think getting the details behind the stated objective, like they're saying, like, we want to change the hiring process. Okay, well, what does that mean for you? Tell me more about that. Because like we see this all the time in startups, and even in your space, and you guys have been around for what, like 10 years or more?
Just about.
It's still new. Like this idea of applicant tracking systems, while we've been doing it for a decade, for most of the market, that's all like brand new stuff. They're still using spreadsheets for a reason. Like they didn't know this existed. And there's this tendency, I think, for, the late majority and the laggards, even some of the early majority, they hear buzzwords around like HR tech or outside of HR, it's like artificial intelligence. Like, oh, we're looking for an AI solution. Okay, cool. Tell me more about that. They don't actually really know what that means, first of all. Or second of all, they're just kind of dumping all of the solutions that are related to hiring in the same pile, even though they're different. It's like, well, we're looking for a better way to recruit candidates. Okay, well, that's cool. We're an applicant tracking system. Are those one and the same? Or are they different? Because I heard about, ways to use AI for recruiting. And so I think like people get very muddled in this world. It's easy for us to see where we sit and what our niche is and how we solve problems. But for the rest of the market, a lot of times they're just thinking very topically, and it's like a pile of laundry where they're putting the lights and the darks and the delicates all in one pile because they don't know anything different.
Yeah.
And so getting to the root of like, well, what does that mean for you? Or tell me more about that. I think that alone can help you figure out like, well, we could show you a demo, but we don't solve the problem that you need solved right now.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. And to double down on that area, oftentimes, and I think we all felt this on the sales side, I'll come to you and say, listen, Scott, I know what I need. Here's what I need. And it's going to be... Yeah.
I'm sure nobody listening to that has ever heard that from a...
Oh, sure.
From a
right?
Just show me the product. I know what I need.
Exactly.
I got it. How much is it?
Yeah. I know what I need. All I need is the price. And oftentimes, and of course, I think we've all kind of found this through either our own experience, whether through coaching or listening or doing this, for years, is you don't know what you need. You have an idea of what you want the outcome to be, but it's a really important difference there, because ultimately, if you can just tell me what you want the outcome to do, well, I can probably find 3 or 4 ways that maybe we can help serve that outcome. And maybe of those 3 or 4, you were only thinking of one. So really, understanding that it's kind of like reframing, and someone says, well, here's what I need. Okay, great. Why do you want that? What's the spirit of what you're trying to achieve? And if you can get beyond the feature dump and the acronyms and the buzzwords and all those things that we hear typically, person to person, just let's have a conversation about this world that you envision. What does success look like? Right? Allow me to back that in and help you understand the ways that we can, or have that conversation where it says, hey, listen, I love the idea. I think it's a great goal. We're probably not the right fit for you, but I can maybe help you out and send you in the direction of a few folks that maybe can better serve that objective.
You used a question in there, Eric. I don't even know if you realize it's a really great question, which is what's the spirit of what you want to achieve?
Yeah.
Because people say, oh, I know what I need, or, I need this outcome. Tend to think very specifically or, quantitatively, or however they want to, they've got a thing in their mind. And so if you kind of extract out a little bit and make it a bit more amorphous, like what's the spirit? Like what's the emotion? It's almost like what's the emotional outcome that you want to get? You can get people talking more freely and away from what they're anchored to as being what they're in their mind is the thing they need.
It's so
what's the spirit of what you want to achieve? I love that question.
Yeah, it's so crucial. A good example of that we hear all the time is, some folks will come to us and they'll say, hey, listen, I want to make sure that my candidates that apply for open jobs, maybe it's something as simple as, hey, they get a thank you email when they go on the career site and they request and they send their application. What they're looking for is not a thank you email. What they're looking for is to improve candidate experience, right? And we can improve candidate experience, in a lot of different ways through a lot of different lenses, but it's really important for us early on in that process to understand that. So from that point moving forward, we continually tie back and we do check-ins and we almost, let's say trial closing, because there's a lot of strategic sales that get involved in here, but we at least confirm that the solution that we have is going to help them achieve what they're looking to set out to get to.
Yeah, that's a great example. Like somebody is like, well, look, I need a system that can send a thank you email when somebody applies. Cool. So what's the spirit of what you're trying to achieve? Well, we want a better applicant experience. Okay. So what are some other ways that you're thinking about improving the applicant experience? Huh. I thought that was it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas there's probably 7 other ways that they could be improving applicant experience that they hadn't even thought of, because they myopically thought, well, if we could just get thank you letters out to candidates, then we would drastically improve our client experience. Well, sure, you would improve it, but there's probably 7 other ways you can improve it as well that they hadn't even thought of.
And then that next question is, okay, great. You have an improved candidate experience. What does that do for you? Oh, people are accepting higher offers at a higher rate. You're shortening that time to fill. Well, what does that do for you? Right? We're ramping faster. We're getting higher quality. We're reducing turnover. And then for us, kind of, if you're taking this down the pain funnel, the next question is, what do you need to get there? Right? Kind of creating that list of requirements. Then ultimately, how do you know you're there? Right? What does success look like in that vein? So I can kind of geek out with you, and I'm going on a tangent now, but I do love the qualification phase. I think there's too often we want to jump past the qual stage and jump into a product demonstration or a demo. And, I'm quite the opposite, where I'll spend a day talking about qual, and the product can be a supporting piece after.
Well, I think it's getting, using your terminology, the spirit of qualification is a lot different than the checklist of whether it's Medic or BANT or whatever. You can spend a lot of time, and I think that's the danger that a lot of companies and startups fall into. They like, okay, I'm going to hire some SDRs. We're going to give them this qualification checklist. We just want to make sure that, whether it's qualify inbound leads or outbound, which we'll talk about in a minute, like just check the list and then pass it off to the AE, and then the AE, you do the demo and take it from there. Like, okay, that is, by definition, the sales process. You've developed the lead, you've qualified the lead, you get them in the sales funnel, but underpinning all of that is the actual pain and the consequence and the spirit of like, what are we trying to achieve? And if you just stay on the superficial level, yeah, you're going to get some deals closed, but you're really going to miss out on the opportunity to create real partnership with people. And in some ways, they could spend less time with the people that aren't truly qualified because the pain isn't really there, and spend more time, the right time, with the right prospects that are willing to open up, and then you'll have a customer for life. So let's talk a little bit about outbound, because that's another question I get. It's one thing to say, okay, we got these inbound leads, we've talked about those that have kind of come through the nurture funnel, and those are perfect because they've continued to opt in along the pathway. They've taken every step along the path, and it's just like, they're almost like, I've seen enough.
Mm-hmm.
Show me the product. I'm ready to buy. So there's sort of that pile. And then you've got the folks that are the inbound hand raisers, as you call them. And we talked through questions and qualification for those. What about the ones that are doing outbound? Maybe, folks that don't follow this path, or you're just, look at a market segment. I know you personally have had some experience in both at Lever, but in other companies where you've had to develop whole new verticals in the past, right? So some of that could mean doing some outbound. How do you think about qualification when you're the one doing the calling, and you want to ask the questions and qualify them, but on the other hand, it's almost like, hey, you called me, why are you asking all the questions here?
Yeah, it's definitely, that's a great tee up. It's very much a give to get, and I think that initially maybe you're living large with all these inbounds, but as companies scale, you're going to get to that point where unit economics and efficiency it's always important, but it gets to the point where we need to have another channel. And I think that's where this really comes into play. For us here at Lever, I'd say 30-40% of what we close is outbound in some way, shape, or fashion. So it's been a lot of hard work, and there's still a lot of ways that we can improve internally. But when we think about qualification specifically through that lens of it being outbound, hey, you called me. I like, or my favorite is, hey, you have a really persistent SDR. And I want to reward that persistence, which is why I'm on the phone call. What do you have? Right. And then that's where it comes in. So, the big difference for me, obviously, outside of the obvious that, hey, we're reaching out to them, is we have to earn the right earlier on in this process. And what I've advised my reps, and, as an IC, I think I will always and forever be a salesperson. I'm on the phone all day with my team still to this day. And on an outbound qualification, we kind of call it a discovery prompter. You don't want to just start by asking questions. What we like to do is start with, if someone is willing to take a phone call, giving them a short overview of the opportunity or the problem that our product addresses. Right? Hey, this is Erik. I work for Lever. We're an applicant tracking system for the modern day business who's looking to scale, and we are firm believers that in order to find top talent, you have to go outbound, and it's a team sport, and that's why we exist. So really making sure that early on in the process, there's a good understanding of who you are. We're purpose-built for this conversation, and the idea behind that discovery prompter is just to get the conversation started. Right? Maybe I'll say, hey, we've noticed that top talent now is harder to find, and it's really important to source top talent. Let me ask you, Scott, have you noticed the same thing in your neck of the woods? And maybe you'll say something like, yeah, I have. Okay, great. Tell me a little bit more about your own experience in that. So really making sure that we help the prospect understand who we are, why we exist, ask them that short overview. And once you've done that, then start, instead of going to, hey, what is your ideal state? There's a very high likelihood that they haven't thought about that yet, right? Again, we reached out to them. They're not in a buying cycle. So asking them questions instead about where you want to get to, but let's look at how this process looks today, right? You have 7 open recs on your website. Tell me how you're going about getting those filled. Are you behind? Gosh, you are. Those are sales roles. And maybe on that second call, you can ask about what that quota looks like for that rep. Oh gosh, they're 3 months behind headcount. They have a $100,000 a month ARR quota. That's a costly rec. That's kind of my high level, Scott, and feel free to ask questions maybe within that as well.
Well, I think there's a couple of things as you described. You've got to give to get, right? So you can't just call somebody up and go, okay, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions to see if you're a fit for our product. And they're like, well, what is your product? Well, don't worry, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
That obviously, again, it's absurd. You wouldn't do that. So I think you just need to meet that person from a human standpoint. But when you're sort of doing your introduction of like, this is what we do, this is what we are, this is what we do. I was listening it was almost like you had some Easter eggs in your sentence or two there, like use the word scale and team sport and top talent. So it's almost like you're like dropping those in on purpose to see if somebody latches on to like, yeah, top talent, man. I got to get top talent. Or yeah, team sport. Like, yeah, I wish I could get my team to help me recruit. Or scale. Like, yeah, I want to scale. I've been sort of bugged that I haven't been able to get out of where I am. I've been sort of stuck in this mode of growth but not scaling. So by getting clear about your ideal customer profile, first of all, and then defining that message, like who you are, what you do, who you help, then it helps to almost get that person to opt in, like top talent, tell me more about that. Because they might not hear the rest of the sentence.
Yeah.
But they're tuning in to certain, it's like radio channels. You turn in the dial and you're like, oh, I love that song. That's a Tom Petty song. I love that song. Let's leave it here. It's Free Fallin'. Like, I get it. I only had to hear 2 words from the melody and I know that's Free Falling. So we're sticking right here on this radio channel. So it's almost the same where it goes back to knowing your ICP. You're not doing outbound, starting with the A's and going through the D's. You probably already know kind of a sense of, okay, this is our list. These are, small businesses or corporates. And so we drop it in those Easter eggs. Then it's almost like aspirational to somebody to go like, yeah, I want to get top talent. Or yeah, I've had this Node.js developer rec open for 6 months. It's killing us because we were trying to release a new product and we just haven't been able to do it. Our customers are banging down the door asking for it, but we just haven't been able to get somebody on board that can build the damn thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. For us, we often find that there's maybe 3 or 4 value drivers and that's it, right? Those are kind of the high level overarching, and it's, finding the right talent. It's having reporting and analytics so you can forecast your hiring. So there's a lot of kind of differentiators that we have within those, but really at the end of the day, in my space and probably similar for folks who are listening, maybe your product doesn't do 25 things, but you probably do 3 things pretty well. And asking those discovery prompter questions will get folks thinking, even when we interact with very early stage startups, or maybe you're 3 or 5 or 9 employees, we see a lot of the success there. And it's not because they don't know incredibly bright individuals. It's actually because they know a lot, but you only have access to your network, right? And I think when you take a step back and you ask yourself, well, is it a fair assumption that the top talent potentially for this role is people that I'm connected to? Probably not. So really helping and challenging that standardized, well, listen, I have a great network. I don't need your help. Maybe when I hit 60 or 90 and I've tapped my network, maybe that's when it's going to be time for me to do that. And when in fact, well, let's not pigeonhole yourself. Let's open yourself up to the world and let top talent ultimately be the ones to kind of decide where they land. So another interesting thought I had as you were walking me through that.
Yeah, and I think you said, maybe your product doesn't do 25 things. I think it's actually dangerous to try to sell on 25 features. There's probably, 2 or 3 or 4 things you do really, really well, or it's unique to the marketplace relative to the rest of the competitors or relative to status quo. And so again, like knowing your ICP, your ideal customer profile, knowing your value proposition, and then you're just sort of opening doors using those Easter eggs or using those keywords and seeing what people gravitate towards. Because the person that says top talent, they might not care about the team sport thing and they may not care about the scale thing, they might have one rec open that they've had open for 6 months. That's absolutely hindering, their ability to move forward. And that's the thing. So that's your selling proposition. Like, cool,
Yeah.
we're going to help you find top talent.
Yeah.
The other person is like, yeah, the team's doing great recruiting and we're already getting top talent, but we're not finding enough to scale, or we're going to be growing faster. We just closed a Series C round of funding and we got to hire 25 engineers. So even though we're team sport and even though we're getting top talent, we need to get more.
Yeah.
Great. So that's your selling proposition.
I think that's really important to note. And any, some advice I'd have for anybody listening, especially if you're early on, is develop what those value drivers are early, and don't try to be a jack of all trades. I think that we probably all, for the most part, understand that. And when you think about what a value driver is, look at the industry that you service, and a value driver is going to be, an issue that's systemic across the industry, whether you exist as a company or not. And again, for Lever, it's top talent's hard to find. That's not because we exist and because we fit that. It's because that's a commonality that we see across all business. So, developing what those are early and being able to speak to those, not so much about your company, but about those systemic issues that are rampant across that industry, really puts you in in a good position to have that conversation around value and impact and all those things that we all love.
Dude, this has been an awesome conversation. I think you've been really generous with your time today and your expertise. There's a bunch of questions we didn't get to because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and preparation. And I know that one of the things that was pretty common in your LinkedIn profile, like you've worked at DemandForce, you've worked at a company called Peak, was it?
Yes, correct.
And in each of those, like a lot of the different companies that you worked with, I noticed the common theme, which was tasked with developing new vertical, tasked with growing sales team from 4 to 12, tasked with scaling operations. So you've got like a whole set of expertise that we didn't even scratch the surface of. So maybe we can do a part 2 down the road and talk about strategies for doing that. In the meantime, I'd certainly appreciate your time and your expertise in sharing that with our audience here. Erik, if people want to, get in touch with you personally or learn more about Lever, where should they go?
Yeah, great question. So you could find me on LinkedIn. My name is Erik, E-R-I-K. Last name is Bulichi, B as in boy, U-L-I-C as in cat, H-I. Lever, it's lever.co, so that's C-O. Don't make the same mistake I did when I applied here initially by putting C-O-M. It will not go through, so lever.co.
Okay.
But I want to add that I really appreciate your time. You've been generous as well, and this has been a lot of fun for me, and I'd love to take you up on any offers that you might have down the road. Yeah,
we'll definitely have to do that. I'm glad Kelly put us in touch. So, dude, I think that's a great place to start or to stop for the day. We'll definitely put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and a link to Lever. Definitely go check it out. You mentioned white papers and ebooks, something I mentioned with Kelly when she was on, Kelly Darcurto, when she was on a guest not too long ago. The amount of content that you guys have just around hiring and diversity and all the challenges, it's really phenomenal what you're cranking out. So any company, like frankly, I'm a fan of your product because I used it when I was at Blend, building out our team, and the engineering team was using it. We used it early. We were in the 1 to 20 category at that time. Now there are a couple hundred people there, but always appreciated the work that you guys have done. And you're just, as a team, I find that you're just very generous with time and expertise and knowledge. And it's really great to know you guys and consider you great partners of the show here.
Yeah, well, likewise on your behalf or on the whole company's behalf. And thanks again for your time, Scott.
All right, Erik. Take it easy, man.
Take it easy. Bye.
All right, let's call that a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Listen, really appreciate you listening to the podcast. We're seeing, as I've mentioned over and over, subscriptions are going up, downloads are going up, more and more people are listening, more and more people are sharing the podcast on LinkedIn, on other places where they're sharing good content like this. And I would love it if you would do me 2 favors. Number 1, if you would tell a friend or 10 about the Startup Selling podcast. Viral still continues to be the best way to spread the word about the podcast that we're doing here. So if you've got a co-founder, a startup founder that you know, somebody who's leading sales at a startup, just say, hey, send them a text right now. Listen, Hey man, listen, I've been listening to this podcast called The Startup Selling Show. It's really great. You should go over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts and go listen to a few episodes. I think you'll love it. So if you would, tell a friend or 10. And secondly, if you are on one of those platforms, one of the best ways for other people to find this podcast is through those reviews. There's all kinds of different algorithms, and one of the algorithms that helps Apple Podcasts and other platforms expose our show to other people just like you is based on the reviews that we're getting. So the more positive reviews and the more positive feedback that we're getting, the more that they will show that to people just like you, so they can get the same great information that you're getting every single time that we publish a podcast episode. So got lots more episodes coming for you. We've been really good about getting one out every single week. We're going to continue to do that through the end of the year. I've got more great guests, and I've got some other great ideas that are related to the book that I just mentioned earlier in this podcast, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, that are all going to become podcast episodes in the coming weeks and months. So make sure if you haven't subscribed that you do subscribe, so you can make sure you never miss an episode. And that's it for now. So thanks again for listening to the Startup Selling Show. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.